Georgia, northern Florida, as well as into South Carolina, and then a flow on the back side of the system that is bringing the water up in Tampa, and we may see an increase in the storm surge values there in Tampa because the storm is going to take this track that's right along the coast, and then even beyond the water up in Tampa, we look going into Tuesday very early in the morning or late Monday, and some of the modeling suggesting that the winds could be easily sustained around 50 miles per hour there into North Georgia and parts of South Carolina as well, and gusting up to 70 and 80 miles per hour. So widespread tree damage. You've still got this tremendous onshore flow that's pushing the waves and water against the coastline there. So again, an absolutely enormous storm, Jen, that's going to have a huge impact over a very large area. But the worst of the impacts coming into the Keys, southwest Florida, and up through Tampa, St. Pete, and into areas just to the west of Orlando. Jen, back out to you.
Carl, you talked about several of the aspects, the wind and also the rain as well from Irma. Let's talk about the storm surge. And, you know, in particular, with this track potentially either just along or just inland on the west coast and getting up towards the Tampa area, let's talk about the surge there. We know that's a very surge-prone city, and we know the first impacts, of course, will be further south in the Florida Keys starting this evening.
Yeah, exactly right. And it is a very surge-prone area because of the nature of the bathymetry, or the sea floor, where you're seeing this orange color right in here. You've got a very shallow continental shelf. And if you've ever been to Tampa and St. Peter, southwest Florida, you know when you go to the beach there, you can walk out for a very, very long way. In an environment like that, unlike a situation where the seafloor drops off very quickly, that really piles up the water as you've got that onshore flow. And so this is an area of the country that is exceptionally surge prone. Now, with that in mind, this is the forecast from the Hurricane Center. There may be an increase in these values along the west coast of Florida because we expect that prolonged period of onshore flow after the storm comes through. 3 to 5 feet right now in Tampa, but you may see that value coming up. So you've really got to think about being away from the coast there in Tampa. This is really significant surge in South Florida and down through the Keys. 5 to 10 feet of surge there, getting right into those intercoastal waterways and those bays, and that's going to cause a lot of significant flooding. The very worst of the flooding perhaps there in southwest Florida, getting up towards Marco Island. Marco Island could be very hard hit by the storm. Naples as well, and up into Fort Myers. 8 to 12 feet of surge is really tremendous. And what do we mean by those values? Well, you take a look at what 1 to 3 feet of surge means. You're talking about enough water to float a car and to bring it away. And you can expect very large areas without power in that level of surge. Then you get up to 3 to 6 feet, and that's easily within what we're expecting across a lot of South Florida. And you're talking about life-threatening conditions. There's a tremendous amount of weight and force in this water. And so trees, building materials, debris can get into that water and act as battering rams. It could reach right up your front door. And then when you get to 6 to 9 feet, this is getting above the first floor of your home. So this is on what we're expecting on the high end in a lot of South Florida. Major damage and building destruction is possible, and that storm surge can extend miles inland. So this is why we say you run from the water and you hide from the wind. You can hide from the wind as long as that water is not going to get to you. But if you're in a place like Marco Island, you've got to get out of there because the surge is really going to be significant, up to 12 feet there in Naples. You're just not going to be able to survive that if you're right along the coast. And winds gusting to 100 miles per hour plus, maybe well above that, could be 130, 140 miles per hour. Up into Tampa, we're right now looking for a surge of up to 5 feet. We may see that number come up. The National Hurricane Center is looking at that possibility right now. Here too, winds gusting to 100 plus miles per hour, so significant wind damage. You may see that right up 75 there. Bradenton, Sarasota, into Tampa, St. Pete, and farther to the north. And then on the east coast, because it is such a large circulation, even though the core of the storm is going to be in the western part of the state, we're still looking for as much as 10 feet of surge in Miami. Winds gusting to hurricane force, even a little bit higher than that as you get into the western exurbs of South Florida. And in Orlando, looking for winds gusting to 75 plus miles per hour coming in late Sunday and also into Monday. And speaking of Orlando, let's go now to Justin Michael, who is there. And Justin, we often think about hurricanes as being a coastal event, but this is certainly not going to be the case with this storm in this part of Florida.
That's exactly right, Carl. In fact, they're taking lots of precautions here in Orlando to make sure everything is basically bolted down. That includes in public parks. We're at Lake Eola Park here, a beautiful park in downtown Orlando. You can see just a wonderful place to come spend time, and you can see the garbage cans all secured to the ground, all of them all the way around. There are recycling bins down that way. And in fact, here at this half shell, all these seats are secured down where they typically are, but still they have gone through painstaking efforts to make sure there is nothing that can turn itself into a projectile, the municipal crews here in Orlando. We've also seen that on the highways. Driving this morning from West Palm Beach to here, we went through several construction zones on 95 and also the Florida Turnpike. There are no barrels in a construction zone. There are no cones in a construction zone. Imagine that for a second. You're driving along and it just kind of feels naked. Well, that's because they took all those out because they could turn into a projectile, especially if people are needing to use those highways, first responders to use those highways to get people to safety. Well, they got those out of there just as a safety precaution. Taking a look right now at some other preparations around Orlando, you can see a restaurant. We went around town this morning gathering some video of the last-minute preps. The storm here is supposed to really impact starting tomorrow late afternoon and really into tomorrow night. That's when we're talking hurricane force winds here in Orlando, and also very, very probably flooding rains. So lots of boards going up, lots of preparations at homes and businesses and apartments happening right now. Of course, about a day out from when they're expected to have a problem here, Irma welcoming itself right here into Orlando. And we spoke to somebody who works at one of those restaurants about the preparations there. Listen.
As a restaurateur, no power would mean we would literally lose thousands of dollars worth of product in our restaurants, because without power, there's no cold refrigeration. All the product has to get thrown out. So we may actually take us another day before our purveyors can actually get us food, before we can actually produce it and then, sell it to our guests.
So, it's not just damage to properties and the potential for that kind of damage, but also damage to things like food. Restaurants, of course, need that. It's their lifeblood. They need that food in there to serve to their people. So they're doing things to make sure they are as prepared as possible for what we're now knowing are going to be hurricane force winds here in Orlando. Because of that and because of what's going to be happening in this part of the state, there are lots of closures here in this part of the state, including probably the biggest closure of them all. The Magic Kingdom, Walt Disney World, will be closing at 9 o'clock tonight. Universal Orlando closes at 7 o'clock tonight. Both SeaWorld Orlando and Busch Gardens Tampa will close at 5 o'clock tonight. Orlando International Airport stopping all flights at 5 o'clock tonight. And all of public schools and, of course, state colleges and universities are closed through Monday. There are many, many more closures and cancellations. You just make sure you're checking out the venues you may be going to. If you're somebody who has tickets to different things at Disney World, make sure you're checking out whether your event has been canceled. It likely has been. One thing about Disney World, though, we do know, despite the fact that the parks are all closing and the venues are all closing, all of the properties as far as hotels and resorts, they're staying open because, of course, those are the places people will go to keep themselves safe. And they're going to hunker down there when there could be potential for 100-mile-an-hour winds in this part, wind gusts in this part of the state. So again, lots of precautions. People seem to be ready. We're going to be talking to first responders and also just everyday people here in Lake Eola Park throughout the day. But again, the general sense we're getting right now, Jen, is that people here are prepared. They know Irma is coming. They've known it for quite some time. And they, at this point, a day out, are ready. Jen in Savannah right now.
Justin, thank you. Good update there. And I think there has been fantastic communication about the risks here, and people know what to do, what they're expected to do in terms of evacuations. And of course, this has been ongoing, now for 4 or 5 days right here. This has been a great planning process to get people out of harm's way. I want to give you some of the other latest stats on what we know right now. There are 15 million people under a hurricane warning presently, more than 3 million under a hurricane watch. I will tell you, we are awaiting the newest advisory that will be in with about 15 minutes from the National Hurricane Center, and we will show you how the watches or warnings have changed. The Tampa airport will cease commercial operations at 8 o'clock tonight, and Florida Governor Rick Scott is telling people living in South Florida to leave right now. Hillsborough County, Florida has issued now a mandatory evacuation order for those who are in evacuation zone A. And in Georgia, Governor Nathan Deal has extended his state of emergency to a total of 94 counties. The Georgia National Guard is preparing 5,000 troops to be on active duty. And as we watch here again from Savannah, a lot of folks have asked me about the airport here, the airport in Charleston. You know, even airports that aren't specifically getting affected today by conditions from Irma. Some restaurants will be closed, right? So there are certain things to anticipate, and your expectations need to be set appropriately, even outside of the impact, the extreme impact areas from Irma. We know conditions are going to go downhill starting today. We've already seen those outer bands come into South Florida. We also know that another threat, along with the core of the hurricane, will be the threat for tornadoes. And some of those outer bands, like we've seen this morning, we will see those tornado warnings. It's already a breezy day right here along the southeast coast. You know, we had a front that came on through, and we're just going to experience these breezy conditions now, only ramping up as we get into the next 24 hours, expecting a very windy Sunday evening, and Monday across Georgia and into South Carolina, expecting the winds to be on the order of 40 to 60 miles per hour. And so damage like you saw with Matthew and all the trees down, right? You know, this is not a storm that is taking a track at all like Matthew, but in terms of damage expected, I think it's going to be very similar here, where we're expecting trees to come down, power outages to go out. The brunt of the weather in Savannah will be felt on Monday into Monday evening. The rainfall overall 5 to 8 inches, but there will be spots that get more than 8 to 10 or even more than 15 inches of rain locally. We are expecting some of those outer bands to kind of set up, but as it slows down just a little bit, we will get some heavy rainfall, which again be a concern right here across the area. So in terms of the timing for Georgia and for South Carolina, today is still a fine weather day, right? You can still continue your preparations. Evacuations are ongoing right here in Chatham County.
Irma, a modest name for this monster of the
be responsible for maintaining the cleanliness as well as the care for that animal during the event.
Welcome back to the Weather Channel's continuing live coverage of Hurricane Irma as it now gets to Florida, slowly but surely. But take a look at some very startling video right now. This is breaking video coming in to the Weather Channel newsroom, and you can see this is coming from Cuba. Talk about some devastation there in Cuba, on the north coast of Cuba. We're talking about blowing winds. We're talking about whiteout conditions. Just take a look at what is coming at Florida right now. That's what you have to keep in your mind when you're looking at video like this. This is the kind of weather that South Florida and Western Florida are going to be experiencing. This is what people have already experienced. Trees down, people rushing to safety. A very dire and dangerous situation that people, in this part of the country have been working very hard to prepare for. But of course, there are some people who are taking it maybe a little too lightly. Well, maybe this will help them jump into action, because in some parts of the state, like where we are right now in Orlando, they have about 24 hours before the really big part of this will start to bulk up. So that's what Cuba looked like. Let's talk to the Rear Admiral Peter Brown, Commander of Coast Guard Operations. Rear Admiral Brown, you are Coast Guard Operations Commander for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and Puerto Rico. Thank you for joining us here on the Weather Channel.
Thank you, Justin, for the opportunity to talk with you and your viewers. And as you said, some people have already been hit by the storm. As you pointed out, in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, particularly the island of St. Thomas, there has been damage there. Coast Guard units and Coast Guard members are now in their third day of response and recovery operations there. And then here in Florida, we are preparing for the storm. Our Coast Guard units and people have essentially evacuated in conjunction with civil authority evacuation orders from the Florida Keys, from the southeast coast of Florida, and from the west coast of Florida. So we take our assets, our helicopters, our airplanes, and our ships, and we move them away from the storm's path, pre-positioned to be able to respond promptly to save lives as soon after the storm passes as we can.
So, Rear Admiral, your job is to come in as the Coast Guard, just like all of our military and first responders' job is to keep people safe, right? How are you working to keep your personnel safe? The people on the ground, on the front lines who are there to keep us safe, how do they keep themselves safe?
So our Coast Guard cutters, our patrol boats, and our medium endurance, our larger cutters, have left the ports of Miami and Key West and St. Pete and gathered in groups at sea far enough from the storm, generally to the south of Cuba, to stay safe there and then to be positioned to respond as quickly as possible. Our aircraft, our helicopters, and our fixed-wing aircraft from Miami, Clearwater, and Jacksonville have positioned out of the state for the moment, but will come back in as soon as it's possible to do so afterwards to begin life-saving search and rescue operations. As you saw in Hurricane Harvey, where the Coast Guard rescued over 11,000 people, the Coast Guard will be prepared both in the air and on the water to respond promptly after the storm.
Rear Admiral Peter Brown, Commander of Coast Guard Operations for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and Puerto Rico. Sir, we do appreciate your time and thank you for your service.
You.
And let's go to Carl Parker in the lab right now. Carl, that video coming out of Cuba is just devastating. We've seen video like that coming up through the islands of Irma and what this storm has done. To see it this close to our shores, even scarier right now than maybe it was before for a lot of people.
Yeah, very, very tough situation in Cuba. We've gotten reports of winds gusting to 159 miles per hour in Cuba. If there is any good news there, it is that they are generally quite well prepared, a lot of sturdy structures and good shelters, and they've had a lot of experience with these storms. But this is a devastating storm and an absolutely enormous storm, and we've got the new advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Category 3 storm now, winds of 125 miles per hour. So we continue to see a slow weakening as the storm has been interacting with land there in Cuba, and the way that we could term this is down but far from being out, because the storm has got every potential to get very very, very strong once again. It continues to be an exceptionally strong storm, but we're talking about not just a Category 3, but quite possibly a strong Category 4, or even a Category 5 storm before it makes landfall. And that's going to be coming up in the Keys later tonight, overnight tonight, and then certainly into southwest Florida into tomorrow. Now moving west at 9 miles per hour. The pressure is 941. Here is the forecast. This is a look at the model forecast. So the trend has definitely been along the west coast there. So we're talking about the core of the storm in that case. Here's the forecast track and intensities from the Hurricane Center following that. Now keep in mind, this is not an impacts cone. This is not showing you where the impacts are going to be. The impacts are going to be well away from the center in this case, because you're talking about not only strong wind over a very large area, but surge effects, winds and waves driving into the coast. That's already producing a water level rise in South Carolina and Georgia. And the forecast now looking at a possible Category 4 storm coming into the Keys. That's the best guess based on all of the available evidence. And then looking at a major hurricane coming up into the Tampa and St. Pete area, and beyond that moving up and into North Georgia. There could be widespread tree damage in these areas. The big thing about this storm is that it is an incredibly large circulation. We're talking about a storm that is absolutely enormous. We'll have more coverage coming up right now.
Storm surge of 5 to 10 feet could wipe out our low-lying areas.
Well, very concerned.
The Weather Channel started talking about this storm far enough out. They heeded our warning.
And our continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma. The new advisory is in. Irma is pounding the north coast of Cuba right now, and the forecast is for Irma to continue to re-strengthen as it heads through the Florida Straits and affect the Florida Keys. Now, I want to give you the latest on the advisory, though. It is now with winds of 125 miles per hour, and the pressure has come up to 941. And the hurricane hunters have been finding that as they've been flying their missions through and getting information. We know the land interaction with Cuba has allowed Irma to weaken slightly. However, it is still a formidable force right now, likely just causing destruction right here on that north coast of Cuba and those islands that go right along it. And then we're also expecting the re-strengthening as it moves up through the Florida Straits. Now, I want to also mention something about the movement. So the movement is still to the west at 9 miles per hour, and the key here is that it's slowed down a little bit, 9 miles per hour, and it has not made that northerly turn just yet. We are anticipating that through the day today as it starts to turn more to the west-northwest and eventually to the northwest and then to the north. But that movement has not happened just yet. A couple of new important updates as well coming in with this new advisory, and that a storm surge warning has now been expanded on the west coast all the way up to the Suwannee River. That includes Tampa Bay. So Tampa Bay is now under a storm surge warning. The watch has been expanded as well, and that on the east coast, I want to mention now the storm surge watch goes all the way to the Isle of Palms in South Carolina. So now we've got the coast of Georgia and we've got part of the coast of South Carolina under a storm surge watch. In terms of the hurricane warnings and hurricanes watches, the warning has been expanded for the Gulf of Mexico coast too, to the Osceola River. All right, let's go now to Pinellas County, which includes the city of St. Pete, and listen into what officials are saying. Okay. All right, so we'll get to that if we can. But again, I just want to continue reading off some of these changes that are coming in, and we'll get them graphically for you as soon as we can. Literally just moments ago, we got the new advisory in for Hurricane Irma, and we have seen the storm surge warnings extended. The storm surge warning now does include the Tampa Bay, and also the storm surge watch has been expanded on the east side, and now that includes coastal areas of Georgia and South Carolina. All right, so let's look at the projected path and see in terms of changes that have happened here. As we look at the short term, look at where Irma is going to travel. It is going to travel right over the Florida Straits. We're expecting a re-strengthening with a landfall at some point during the day on Sunday, likely later in the day as we watch the West Coast implicated. Let's go now to Pinellas County and get an update from officials there.
The worst of the storm surge will occur on the back end of the storm, and that's estimated to occur between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. on Monday. Given these forecast conditions, we declared the mandatory Level B evacuation for Pinellas County effective at 8 a.m. this morning. In addition to the 7 shelters that were opened yesterday to support the current Level A evacuation, we have opened 9 additional shelters today for a total of 16 emergency shelters available. This is a dangerous, impactful storm. It requires your serious attention and your immediate action. Pinellas County, our cities, and our other governmental partners have prepared and taken action. Now it's your turn. If you are in a Level A or B evacuation zone or reside in a mobile home anywhere within Pinellas County, you must evacuate. The time for procrastination is over. You must act now. And with that, I'll turn the briefing over to Sheriff Galtieri.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mark. From a law enforcement perspective, we have maintained the checkpoints into the barrier islands and have restricted access, as we talked about previously. So far, it's going well. I would tell you that probably about 40% of the people who approach the checkpoints have been turned away because they shouldn't be out there and are not residents or business owners or people with a need to be there. I anticipate that we'll make a decision at some point as the day progresses today to further restrict access. And we will get to a point, and I can't tell you just yet when that point will be, but we will get to a point, and it will be sooner rather than later, that we are not going to allow any.
All right, hearing about the preparations from officials in Pinellas County right there. We've got breaking news, a brand new advisory from the National Hurricane Center. The storm is now a Category 3 hurricane with winds of 125 miles per hour. That very close interaction with Cuba there. The storm is basically half on land, half off of land. That has served to weaken the system somewhat, but it's still a very large circulation, and it's got every opportunity to re-strengthen as it comes back out into the open water, into the Florida Straits, and coming up towards the Keys here. That's going to be coming up later today and overnight tonight, moving into the Keys overnight and early tomorrow morning. So here's the updated forecast track and intensities from that are well outside of that area all the way up into the coast here. You've got storm surge and very strong winds as well. This cone is showing you where the center of the storm is likely to go, and it's probably going to move right up and along the west coast of Florida and could very well be a Category 4. And keep in mind that with intensity forecasts, there's some wiggle there as they can be in error in the longer term in particular. So we could be talking about a storm that's even stronger than that, especially if it's on the western edge of that envelope there, that forecast error, as you could be talking about a storm that is out over the open water for a longer period of time. So this is going to be devastating in southwest Florida and the Keys, as well as the west coast of Florida up into the Tampa area. Major hurricane likely coming right into Tampa and also into the central part of the state and into Orlando. And then beyond that, the storm comes up and across South Georgia and into North Georgia, and it's still going to be a formidable storm at that time, though it will be weakening. Again, you're talking about a very large circulation, and winds could easily gust to 80, perhaps 90 miles per hour in North Georgia. So widespread tree damage is likely in the Atlanta metro area as the storm moves in. There's a look at the advisories. Now, keep in mind, this is not telling you about the level of impact. This is rather telling you about timing, and where the hurricane warning is in effect. That's where hurricane force winds are expected inside of 36 hours. And in fact, it's going to be a lot sooner than that there into South Florida. Hurricane watch is where hurricane force winds are possible in 48 hours. You see that extends a little farther west, now reaching over into the Panhandle and also up into South Georgia. And this is a look at the timing of those tropical storm force winds. So this is when you've got to be ready to shelter. Those strong winds are coming in right now. We've already gotten winds gusting over 60 miles per hour in Homestead as well as into the Middle Keys. Those strong tropical storm force winds coming up into Palm Beach County as well as into Naples, we think by this evening, by early evening. So again, you've got to be at your safe place by that time. And then the tropical storm force winds getting up towards St. Pete and Tampa, Bradenton, Sarasota, the Space Coast as well, just south of Orlando by tomorrow morning, and then up into northern Florida by tomorrow evening. And again, we're talking about a very, very large circulation. Not the largest that we've ever seen, certainly, but it's way up there. Tropical storm force winds extending out 200 miles from the center, and the hurricane force winds extending out 70 miles from the center. And so as we bring this extremely large area up into southern parts of Florida, you're looking at hurricane force wind gusts making it into South Florida as the core of the storm is coming up into southwest Florida and into the Keys there. So that's where the greatest damage from wind and surge is likely, right in there. But you're going to see a tremendous onshore flow coming up into South Florida, and that's why we're looking at a water level rise of 5 to 10 feet there. And again, those hurricane force wind gusts. Looking at the trends here in the satellite picture over the last several hours, you can see there was more of a westward component early on. Now we're seeing a little more of a northwest component, perhaps, even though the official motion is west. And so it is still interacting with land, but as it moves away from Cuba and more towards the northwest and north, it's going to be coming over exceptionally warm water there. Water temperatures in the lower 90s in some areas and in the upper 80s. So there's more than enough fuel to bring the storm back up to a solid Category 4. And again, there is some room for error there, so even possibly a Category 5 as it is coming into the southwest coast of Florida. See winds now gusting to 40 miles per hour in Key West, gusting to 38 in Marathon. So our tropical storm force conditions underway now in the Keys and getting up into southern parts of the Miami-Dade area. And let's get over to Justin Michaels. He is in Orlando. And Justin, this is going to be a really significant storm there in Orlando, as well as we could easily be talking about a prolonged period of hurricane force wind gusts.
Yeah, and Carl, that's a big concern because of what does Orlando mean? Well, the happiest place on earth, the Magic Kingdom's right up the street, right? We've got Disney World here, we've got Universal Orlando here, we've got other theme parks here, which means there are tourists here. And someone watching this very closely is Chief John Mina, Chief of the Orlando Police Department. Chief, thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Justin.
So tell me, as you have been preparing and getting your residents and the citizens here and your visitors here ready for this hurricane, what has been your message?
Our message is to listen to the media reports, take this storm very seriously, and shelter in place. Make sure you have all the necessary needs. A gallon of water per day per person. Make sure you have your food and water for enough days, because there will be some power outages for us here in Central Florida.
Well, we do know hurricane force winds expected to kick in tomorrow night, Sunday night into Monday. It's going to be quite a night here in Orlando as far as rain and winds. As far as your police force and their safety and maybe people needing to be rescued, what are you asking of your citizens when it comes to what's happening during the storm?
Well, within the next few hours, we will probably let people know about a curfew that will happen sometime tomorrow evening. We're asking people to stay indoors, don't put themselves in danger, because there may be points in the storm where we cannot respond to those people. So asking people to stay indoors, shelter in place, and not be tempted to go outside. It's going to be very dangerous out there.
And Chief, one more question for you. As you go around the city of Orlando and probably even the outskirts of Orlando, different communities, different cities around Orlando, do you feel the area is ready? You as law enforcement?
I do. You can tell people are taking this very seriously. People are boarding up. They're getting all the food and supplies they need to shelter in place. So I feel very good about our community. Our government is ready. Police and fire, emergency management. We've all been working for days and days preparing for this. We're ready, hoping for the best, preparing for the worst.
Awesome. Very good. Chief, thank you so much. John Mina, we appreciate your time. You stay safe. Thank you for your service. Yeah, thank you. So again, you heard the chief say here, Jen, we're going to be talking about a curfew that will likely go into place tomorrow afternoon and, of course, through Hurricane Irma, going through here all Sunday night into Monday morning. And again, hurricane force winds. The good news, Jen, he feels this city and all the surrounding cities here in Central Florida are ready. Jen, up to you in Savannah.
Well, that is key, and preparation is key. It's happening all the way here in South Georgia as well. We do have a mandatory evacuation that begun this morning, is ongoing, and actually will continue through tomorrow morning as well. I want to bring back in the latest advisory, though, to talk about a couple of things here. So I want to focus in on first the winds. The winds from Irma have come down to 125. Now, certainly with the impact to land, we anticipated that, and it is now a Category 3. But one thing to note from this latest advisory is that everything's been pushed north, because now it's about a timing thing. And so now the hurricane warnings, the hurricane watches have all been pushed north, and you can see the tropical storm watch as well. The hurricane watch extends all the way up into South Georgia, Albany, Georgia, under a hurricane watch, actually in a tropical storm watch, but just south of there under that hurricane watch. So anticipating inland impacts. And in fact, the latest forecast, keeps it as a very strong hurricane, even as it makes the landfall and continues inland. And we will see those hurricane force winds impact inland areas. This is not just a coastal event. Look at that. At Monday morning, we still have it as a 115-mile-per-hour hurricane, which will be having far-reaching effects as those outer bands lash South Georgia and even into South Carolina. Power outages are going to be a significant concern. In fact, millions expecting power outages all the way from Florida right up into Georgia, maybe even parts of Alabama, and certainly into South Carolina. Irma has been lashing the northern coast with its eye wall actually for the last several hours here, but we know how far-reaching the impacts are, and you can see from this video from the eastern part of Cuba. Look at those trees bending in the wind. We can see visually there are some structures that have been damaged as well, and folks trying to seek shelter as the storm lashed Cuba. And now as Irma continues to actually just put its full force on that northern coast of Cuba and the islands right there. Today we're expecting that move up over the Florida Straits, and we're already feeling the impacts here into the southern U.S., including the Florida Keys and South Florida, getting some of those outer bands. And in fact, in Fort Lauderdale, some of those outer bands have already made their way in. As you can see, if we look at the radar right here. Let's go down to Fort Lauderdale, and NBC's Sarah Rosario is there with more. Sarah, good day to you. Tell me what the town is like right now.
Well, Jen, here in Fort Lauderdale, so far we've had on and off wind and rain, actually a lot of wind, but a little bit of rain. We haven't had steady downpours yet, but we're told that that is on the way. We're expecting that to come. Out here on the beach, we're seeing these waves crash along the shore as families come out here just trying to get a last look before things really start to deteriorate. A little ray of sunshine even right now. We've seen all types of people out here, surfers, kite surfers, everyone just trying to take advantage of some of these great waves out here, even though city officials are warning people this storm is massive, it's powerful, it's extremely dangerous. You need to get out of this area as the storm comes in. We just got some new information from a press conference a couple minutes ago where we learned that governor is telling everybody, the whole state of Florida, that everyone needs to be prepared to evacuate. He's telling people that if you live in South Florida, you need to get out of this area by noon today. Here in Broward County, where I am, we're told that a curfew will go into effect at 4 p.m. And as the winds start to increase, local officials tell people they will not be able to call 911. Emergency responders will not be available to help. Police officers are blocking several streets right now. I'm told there's an officer on every causeway. All the bridges are closed, gas stations closed, airports closed. These officers will get off the streets once the winds here reach 45 miles per hour. So we're tracking the storm here in Fort Lauderdale, seeing how it's impacting this area. We'll keep you updated throughout the day. Live in Fort Lauderdale, Jen, back to you.
All right, Sarah, thank you for that. You can see again, it's breezy everywhere throughout Florida already in advance of the system, and the winds are really going to pick up as those bands move in through the evening today, and certainly by tomorrow things going downhill. Let's talk about Savannah. I'm in Chatham County. Savannah's in Chatham County. There is a mandatory evacuation here, and actually for all areas in South Georgia to the east of I-95 and a couple of spots to the west of 95 as well. So to help facilitate that, the Georgia EMA is doing a contraflow on I-16, and we've been following that. They started this morning by reversing the lanes, and so far, so good, as what we've heard and what I can follow out there in terms of how that is going. Now, you can see in terms of the alerts that we've got the expansion of the Hurricane Watch and Tropical Storm Watch now into parts of inland South Georgia. There's a view of the contraflow. Again, traffic is moving along just fine and in very orderly fashion right there on Interstate 16. So the weather has certainly helped the situation as well. Weather today has been dry, anticipated to stay dry. It's a little breezy, but other than that, no other weather concerns here across South Georgia. You know, in Charleston, where I was yesterday, they are not under an evacuation. There are some areas near the Beaufort area that are, and certainly heed the local warnings on that. But in Charleston, they decided not to do a mandatory evacuation. But there are still watches now expanded through the area. So Savannah now, from this map appearing under Hurricane Watch, the tropical storm watches have expanded up into South Carolina, and conditions will go downhill through the overnight tomorrow night into Monday, with the brunt of the system here where I am in southeast Georgia being felt on Monday. We'll have continuing coverage on powerful Hurricane Irma after this.
pet owners should bring all appropriate vaccination records and the appropriate kennel for the size of the dog, or the kennel or the crate. Again, bring all your supplies. You're responsible for picking up the pet waste. There must be a family care member or a caretaker for the pet present always.
And that was from Collier County, where shelters are filling up as people heed the evacuation orders and get to a safe shelter. Conditions going downhill starting later today with those outer bands. In fact, already this morning, we've been feeling the impacts of Irma in South Florida. Now, here in the Savannah area, it's been a breezy day, not because of Irma necessarily, but we've had a front that's come on through and some dry air has worked in for now. That's going to change significantly because in Savannah, we are now under a hurricane watch and a storm surge watch as of the new advisory that just came in from 11 o'clock from the National Hurricane Center. So let's talk about the impacts here. Under a mandatory evacuation, I want to bring in the mayor of Savannah, Eddie DeLoach, to talk more about, Mr. Mayor, come on in here, talk more about what we're expecting. So first of all, city preparations. I know we're under evacuation, but what is the city doing to help facilitate that?
Well, we got the Chatham area management group. They're actually working hard now, having people leave the area. We're loading up about 7 buses at a time. We got about 1,000 people we got to get out of town that don't have a drive or can't or don't have a ride or something like that. So, and those that are in wheelchairs and that type thing. So we've got that going on right now to take care of them and move them out. And we also are setting up buses for those that aren't handicapped that need a ride out also. So it's running right now over at the Civic Center, and everybody's on hand. It's all running smooth. So we sort of got prepared last year when we had Matthew come through, and everybody thought that might be ours for the for the next 30 years. But unfortunately, we have this one coming this way. But we'll deal with it and move forward with it, and we got a great group of people taking care of people.
Well, 48 hours ago, Savannah was pretty much in a direct line for this. Now, the impacts are going to be different, but still significant, actually. So do you think now that we're under hurricane watch and a storm surge watch, that will help people take it more seriously?
They need to take it seriously because that surge itself is 3 foot higher than what we had with Matthew right now. So if they realize what happened at Tybee and that surge that they had, people should know that they need to get out of the low-lying places and the areas on the other side of the Truman Parkway, which is a big deal to us. They need to move up to higher ground and move out of town if they can do that. I know we've got a mandatory, evacuation, so I hope everybody takes it seriously and everybody moves out of town as quick as possible.
The wind actually will likely be worse than what you experienced from Matthew.
Yes.
And so what preparations is the city making to make sure everything's secured and can withstand winds of in excess of 60 or 70 miles per hour?
Well, we've had the fire department and the police department's been going around and making sure that things are set up and taken care of. And SEMA's been working really hard to make sure we've got it all, everything in line. So I'd say we're batting down as far as we can do. As us batting down, we're batting down ready to go, because we thought it was going to be a really, category 3. So now here we go, we back up, but it's still, you got to be concerned about the weather, because we didn't have, it took us all year just to get cleaned up from Matthew. So with that under, you add that to what we got coming here, and it's worse than Matthew, then we need to plan on something
Preparation
serious.
is key, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
all right, thank you so much. Appreciate your time here today.
Have a great day.
And Carl, I have been comparing to Matthew because here in South Georgia and also in South Carolina, we know that the wind will likely be worse in terms of strength, despite the track being completely different than it was with Matthew. And then also when it comes to the tides here, the water is going to be higher than it was with Matthew. So if you flooded with Matthew, their plus will be impacted by the flooding that we're expecting from Irma. All right, Carl, let's talk more about the water and the surge, because we know surge has now become a bigger issue on the west coast of Florida too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've got breaking news right now. This is the new storm surge forecast from the National Hurricane Center, and some pretty significant changes here. Now, notice, first of all, South Florida a little bit lower there. Palm Beach and Broward counties down to 2 to 4 feet, 4 to 6. A large part of Miami-Dade County, still 5 to 10 as you get down into southern Miami-Dade and out into the Keys. But here is the very big change. Where we were looking at 6 to 12, that has now been raised to 10 to 15. 15 feet southwest Florida from Everglades City through Naples, Marco Island, and getting up into Fort Myers as well. That is a terrific amount of storm surge. This is based on the new forecast track of the storm, the trending in the models, the current position, the fact that it's going to be more coming up into the western part of the state. You do not want to be anywhere near the coast with a surge that high. You will simply not survive that if you are on the beach with a surge that high. Then 6 to 10 feet. This is another big bump up, and that extending from just north of Fort Myers towards Boca Grande, as well as our Boca Grande into Northport, Sarasota, Siesta Key, and into Bradenton as well. And another very big change was 3 to 5 feet there in Tampa and Tampa Bay. That is now 5 to 8 feet of potential storm surge. St. Pete Beach, as well as into Clearwater and Largo, and into the Tampa Bay area as well. That is a lot of surge, and again, you want to get away from the coast in those areas. Notice also 4 to 6 feet up here towards Cedar Key in the Big Bend area of Florida, 2 to 4 all the way up the east coast of Florida, and 4 to 6 in parts of Georgia and up into South Carolina. So again, we could be talking about some water levels that are rivaling what we saw with Hurricane Matthew. So in Naples, again, tremendous storm surge, up to 15 feet of surge. You just simply cannot be on the coast and expect to survive that. 100+ mile-per-hour winds. That's going to be coming in late tomorrow. We look at Fort Myers. We see a very similar situation, 15-foot surge on the high end, winds gusting over 100 miles per hour. And then we take a look at Tampa, Florida, and a surge of up to 8 feet there in the surrounding area, and 100+ mile-per-hour winds there in Tampa. So what exactly does that mean when we're talking about that level of surge? Well, when you've got 1 to 3 feet of surge, that is going to be enough to actually float cars and cause widespread power outages where that comes in. Then once you get to 3 to 6 feet, you're talking about life-threatening surge. You're looking at a lot of debris being picked up by all of that water. There's a tremendous amount of weight and force in that water. Could reach halfway up your front door. And then when you get up to 6 to 9 feet, that's reaching above the first floor of your home. Major damage and building destruction possible, and that can extend miles inland as well. So that's 6 to 9 feet, and we're now talking about 10 to 15 Everglades City and Fort Myers, Marco Island, and up towards and into Naples as well. 10 to 15 feet there and up to 8 feet in Tampa. So basically from southwest Florida all the way up towards Tampa, you've got a significant storm surge threat, and you've simply got to be off the coast in these areas. Storm surge warning now in effect from near Cedar Key down through Tampa Bay, right down into southwest Florida, including the Keys, and then along the east coast of Florida as well. Let's take a look at timing. This is one of our high-resolution models. This is called the RPM model. And what it's showing you, first of all, is a very, very large circulation. Not the biggest we've ever seen, but it is very large. And then here you see the core of strongest winds. So that's where the very most damaging winds are. That'll be coming in overnight tonight there into the western end of the Keys. We've also got hurricane force winds starting to affect southern parts of Miami-Dade County there, getting up into Homestead. Very strong wind in southwest Florida as well. Then we take it into Sunday afternoon. Core of the storm right into Naples and Fort Myers and Marco Island, Everglades City. Those areas being ravaged by wind. We see a significant water level rise as well. We also see a significant onshore flow into South Florida, and that's where we're talking about a water level rise again of about 2 to 4 feet as you get farther up the coast. 4 to 6 there in Miami, 5 to 10 southern parts of Miami-Dade County and southward. Then going into late Sunday night, very early Monday morning, that's when that eye wall is getting up into Tampa and St. Pete, so it's going to be coming in late tomorrow evening into Sarasota and into Bradenton. You've still got this big onshore flow coming up and across Florida and farther north all the way up into Georgia and South Carolina. Then we take it into Monday morning, and we're looking at hurricane force winds there in north central parts of Florida near Orlando. And take a look at the onshore flow here. This is what's got us really concerned when you're going to see this very strong wind on the back side of the circulation that's going to drive right into Tampa Bay. So it's going to be starting overnight Sunday and then going into Monday morning when we really maximize that potential for significant water level rise in Tampa and St. Pete. And again, we're talking about now 5 to 8 feet of surge in Tampa. So you have got to be off the beaches there in Tampa and St. Pete, as well as all the way down the coast. Then beyond that, we take the storm into Monday. We still see a significant onshore flow. That's why we're looking for a widespread area of 4 to 6 feet of surge in Georgia and parts of South Carolina. And then here into North Georgia, very strong northeast winds really starting to kick in late on Monday. They'll be overspreading Georgia, but you're talking about a large area